workers are highly specialized. In those places, output's pretty high. And so there's a lot of stuff for it's abundant, so people can consume it. Workers are highly
My bad.
okay. In other places where there's not a high division of labor, where one person does everything, or very few people do everything, those places aren't rich. For one thing, in the extreme case, just imagine yourself living alone. Suppose everybody in the world died except you. Right? So you're living with all this in the world that we have, and everyone's dead except you. How rich would you be? You'd be poor very quickly. So Smith said specialization is the key. And a lot of the book is devoted to what can we do to increase specialization. We'll talk more about that later in the semester. Right now I want to focus on his explanation for why specialization works. Why specialization increases the total amount of output that any given number of people can produce. He gives a famous example just to show the power of specialization. It's an example of a pin factory, of pins, like the things you stick into the head of voodoo dolls, P-I-N. Back then, by the way, pins were a lot more important than they are today. People use pins for a lot of things that we don't today. So, he says, we don't know exactly when. We think about 100 years earlier. So in the 17th century. So if you went into a pin factory that had ordinary workers, we're not talking about the LeBron James of pin workers, no, ordinary workers. And you looked at how much those workers produced each day. The typical factory, back then, 100 years before Smith wrote, the typical worker in that factory would produce between 10 and 20 pins each day. Between 10 and 20 pins each day. But now, says Adam Smith, the same quality workers, these ordinary people, ordinary manual workers, now in the pin factory, in the mid-18th century now, the typical worker produces on average about 4,800 pins a day. That's a huge increase. From 10 to 20 a day to 4,800 pins a day. Wow, how does that happen? Let me quickly say that this is not a story about factory management. The factory is an example. It's real, but he meant it as an example for society at large. So what happened in this factory that caused the same worker to be able to go from producing just 10 to 20 pins a day to being able to produce nearly 5,000 pins a day? Smith said, well, the only thing that happened really is that they divided their labor. They specialized. A century ago, he said there were about 18 distinct, you don't have to know these numbers, get the flavor of the story. There were about 18 distinct tasks involved in making a pin. One worker would pull the wire from the spool, cut the wire, spend time sharpening one end into a pointed that makes it a pin, spend another bit of time taking another part of the wire and flattening it, spending more time putting the head onto the pin, spend time doing something called whitening the pin. I have no idea what that is. About 18 of these different tasks. Previously, one worker did all of the tasks, top to bottom. Now, says Adam Smith, again, the mid-18th century as opposed to the mid-17th century. Work is specialized. One worker does nothing but, one worker specialized in pulling spool from the, wire from the spool. Another worker cuts the wire. Another worker specializes in sharpening one end of the cut wire into a point. Another worker specializes in making the head. Another worker specializes in putting the head on the pin. So all we do is take the same workers and just use them differently. Have them specialized rather than be generalists. and total output goes way up. Now, if that's true, there's no doubt that it's true, and you generalize that insight to society as a whole, you start to get some insight as to why we are as prosperous as we are. We live in a world of deep specialization. All I do is teach and write about economics. That's all I do. There are physicians out there. When my son was very young, he almost died. He had a very rare disease. Fortunately, his life was saved because there's such a thing these days as a pediatric gastroenterologist. That's a deep specialty. All this doctor did was spend time diagnosing and treating children with eating disorders, with gastrointestinal diseases. That's a deep specialty. So if you take what Adam Smith said about the pig factory, generalize it over society as a whole, we start to get some sense for what's going on. Let's go back to the pig factory. Smith gave 3 reasons why specialization, what he called the division of labor, causes output to go up. Each of these 3 reasons is correct. I'm going to give them to you in order of increasing significance. So from the least important to the most important. So Smith said, why does specialization cause output to rise so significantly? Well, one reason, says Adam Smith, is workers, when they specialize, compared to when they don't waste time moving from task to task. Time spent basically commuting from one part of the factory to another is time that's not being spent to produce a pin or anything else. And so if a worker stays in one place, that worker can produce more in a given day, in a given amount of time. That's true, it's pretty insignificant. A second reason, says Adam Smith, for why specialization causes output to go up on the whole, is that when workers specialize, to put it in his terms, they become more dexterous. We say, you just become better. When you concentrate on doing something, you know this from your own experience. You get better at doing it. So if you spread your time too much doing lots of different chores, you're not going to spend enough time in any one of them to become very skilled at doing any one of them. But if you concentrate on doing one of them, then you will spend more time doing that, and you'll become better at doing it. You get better muscle memory. You know that. I'm sure some of you play the piano. You don't pop out of the womb knowing how to play the piano. You have to practice. The more you practice, the better you become. Even someone with a great natural talent for playing the piano won't become a very good piano player if that person spends only 5 minutes a day practicing, and lots of other spends his or her other time doing other things. So when we concentrate, when we specialize, we simply become better at it. We do it faster. We do it with fewer mistakes. So fewer units of output have to be discarded. We do it more regularly. The output becomes more uniform. So as workers specialize in doing each task gets done more to a greater quantity. That's true too, but that can't explain the modern world. It's the third factor that Smith identified that is no doubt far more important than the first 2. Adam Smith said that when workers specialize, that will lead to, it's more likely to lead to mechanization, lead to the development of a machine to replace the worker. That is a huge source of economic growth. I'll explain later why Adam Smith believed that specialization led to mechanization of tasks. But let's just look at the consequence of mechanization. So when a machine takes over for a worker, two important outcomes emerge from that. The first is that machines generally work faster than any human. And machines don't take breaks. They don't need vacation. They don't have to sleep. They don't get sick. They have to be repaired. Sometimes they break down. They don't go on strike. Machines are generally stronger and faster than human beings at doing it. So you need a machine to pull wire from a spool. That machine can pull that wire a lot faster than a human being can. So you get a lot more wire pull. The machine can cut the wire. The machine's doing it a lot faster than a human being can. The machine can sharpen the end of a piece of cut wire into a pinpoint. A machine can do a lot more than sharpening in any 1 hour than can a human being. And do it a lot better. There's a great show called How. Anybody ever seen the show How It's Made? So it's a great show. It's a show for nerds, kind of. But it just shows how, they take you to a factory and they show you how ordinary things are there, how soft drinks are bottled, how face masks are made, how sneakers are made. And in our world today, much more so than in the time of Adam Smith. Factories, or we call them highly capital intensive. Most of the work is done by machines. And when How It's Made takes its camera into these factories in order to show the viewers how things are made, very often they have to slow the replay of what the camera films down to slow motion, because the human eye can't see how fast these machines work. They work so fast we can't tell what's going on. So in order to tell what's going on, they have to show it in slow motion. Human beings can't work that fast. Machines can work really fast. So the machine, first of all, produces a lot more output in any given amount of time than any human being can produce. But much more importantly than that, here's the second effect of what happens when machines replace workers. The worker who's no longer needed to do the task that the worker was doing, it's now being done by the machine, can now do something else that we couldn't afford to have done before. And so society gets not only the output that the worker used to produce that's now being done by the machine, and more of that, but also whatever new output the worker is producing. In 1776, when Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, and when Thomas Jefferson penned the glorious Declaration of Independence, it took, depending upon which data you look at, it took between 80 to 90 workers in America to feed 100 Americans. In other words, between 80 and 90% of American workers worked in agriculture. Only 10 to 20% worked in anything else. You only had 10 to 20% of workers who were printers, or lawyers, or doctors, or preachers. The vast majority of people worked in agriculture. Today, anybody want to guess what percentage of American workers work in agriculture today? It's between 1 and 2. But 1 and 2. And even that's probably an overestimate caused by various tax laws. But let's take 2%. That means it only takes 2 Americans now to feed every 100, as opposed to at least 80 Americans just 250 years ago. If we had the same agricultural technology today that we had in 1776, I wouldn't be up here teaching economics. The world couldn't afford me to do that. I'd be working on a farm. You wouldn't be in college probably. You would be working on a farm or on a ranch. Over the years, we replaced a lot of workers in agriculture with non-human means of production, with machines like tractors, with chemical processes like fertilizers and insecticides. All of that releases labor from the farm and allows workers to do something else. Same thing happens in factories. Workers get released from their factory jobs, they go off to do other things, and society gets the output not only from the factory, they get the output of the other things as well. I mentioned a moment ago that my son's life 22 years ago was saved by a highly specialized doctor in New York City who was a pediatric gastroenterologist. There's no way afford to have anyone specialize in being a pediatric gastroenterologist if 80 to 90% of us had to work in agriculture simply to eat. So those are the three reasons given by Adam Smith for why specialization causes output to rise. Workers don't waste time moving from task to task, true or trivial. When workers specialize, they become better at what they do, and so they can do it faster and better, and with fewer errors. True, not so trivial, but not super significant. 3, mechanization. As you probably know, the economic system that Adam Smith was describing was very successful in Great Britain. By the 19th century, it was much further along than it was in the 18th century when Adam Smith lived, and it was named by Karl Marx, capitalism. The reason Karl Marx called it capitalism is because he quite rightly looked around and said, wow, there are a lot of machines. Workers work with a lot of machines, unlike any other system that we've ever had. Capital is another word for, we'll see that later, capital is another word for machines, the tools that workers work with. And wow, we got a lot of them here in 19th century Great Britain. That's where Marx lived when he wrote his famous works. Adam Smith and Karl Marx didn't have a whole lot in common, but they certainly had, Marx agreed with Smith that this economic system that Smith was describing in 1776 did give rise to a lot of mechanization. Smith thought it was good. Marx, he didn't think it was bad, but he thought it had some ill consequences that Smith didn't identify. Real quickly, the reason Adam Smith believed that specialization led to mechanization is kind of a psychological explanation. He said, you know, if one person's doing a whole bunch of things, pulling wire from a spool, cutting it, sharpening one end into a pinpoint, one person's doing all that, it's really hard to conceive of making a machine to do all that. The more simple the task, the more likely it is, said Adam Smith, that someone will observe that worker and go, aha, I bet I can build a machine to do that. Probably really easy to build a machine to do nothing but pull wire from a spool. Pretty simple. And then really easy to build a machine to do nothing but cut wire. More difficult to build a machine to do it all. And so Smith reasoned that as tasks became more and more specialized, it became more and more likely that it would dawn on someone, a worker, a factory manager, someone else, who observed that worker, and they would get the bright idea of inventing a machine to do that. So Adam Smith writes The Wealth of Nations, publishes it in 1776. He dies in 1790. It was such a great book. I think I may have mentioned this to you, every spring semester, I teach a seminar here at GMU on The Wealth of Nations. So the students and I sit around a seminar table and we discuss The Wealth of Nations. We read the thing cover to cover, so I've read it 14, 15 times in my life. It's a great book. One reason people still do this is because it's very well written. It's beautifully written. And he was a man of enormous insight. And he is, as I mentioned, widely regarded as the father, the founder of modern economics. He didn't, as I think I said, he didn't ever recognize that he had this distinction. He went to his grave not knowing that he did this. But people read his work, and that inspired them to think and write along similar lines. The next great work in economics, you don't have to know this guy's name, I'll just mention it for the record. The next great work in economics was in France. There was a guy in France, a man named Jean-Baptiste Say, S-A-Y, you don't have to know that, I'm just telling you for interest, who read English, and he read Adam Smith's work, and he was very inspired by it, and that prompted him to write his own book. He wrote a great book in French, published in 1798, I think it was. But that didn't have much of an impact right away on English language economics. The next great book in English language economics was written by a man who has the second name that you have to know, a man named David Ricardo, R-I-C-A-R-D-O. If this were a proper classroom and I had a whiteboard, I would write the name down for you, but it's not a proper classroom. It was designed by someone who doesn't teach, I can tell. I'm going to use the dot cam later because I need to show you some things. Anyway, man named David Ricardo. Again, you never have to know these dates, but just to put him in historical context, Ricardo was born in London in 1772. And he died in London in 1823. So he didn't know Adam Smith, but he read The Wealth of Nations as a young man, made a big impact on him, and he began writing letters to people. He wrote a famous book in 1817 called on the Principles of Political Economy and Taxation. You don't have to know the name of that book, but it's in that book that that book contains the next great principle that I'm going to share with you. We're going to spend a lot of time on this principle. You've heard of it, although you almost certainly don't know what it means. It's the principle of comparative advantage. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a moment. But first, just a real quick word about Ricardo. So Ricardo, that name obviously is not a typical British name, even though Ricardo was born and lived all of his life and died in London. Ricardo's parents immigrated to England before he was born from Portugal. The Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, was back then still quite Catholic. And Ricardos were Orthodox Jews. And being an Orthodox Jew in a very Catholic region, when the church was very strict, was not very comfortable. And so a lot of Orthodox Jews left Portugal and Spain for Holland and England, which at the time were by far the most religiously tolerant countries in the world. Not religiously tolerant by our standards today, but by the standards of their day, very much so. And so Ricardo grew up in London, but his native language was Hebrew, not English, which is why, while Adam Smith is fun to read and beautiful to read, reading David Ricardo is like sticking needles in your eyes. He's really a terrible writer, but he's a brilliant man. And so if you struggle with what he wrote, you get a lot of insight out of it, as a lot of people have done. Actually, one more thing about Ricardo, which I think is just charming. So his family is very wealthy. They were investment bankers in London. His father was. And David, when he was young, was destined to enter the family business, but he fell in love. It's a true story. He fell in love with a Quaker. Quakers are not Jews, of course. His family were very serious Orthodox Jews, and they told David, if you marry the Quaker girl, as he asked to do, we will disown you. And you will lose all your access to family connections and family wealth. David Ricardo followed love rather than money, and he married the Quaker girl. It was a very happy marriage until he died too young at the age of 51. They had children. I'm forgetting her name at the moment. But David was very smart, and he made investments of his own. And by the time he died in 1823, he was probably the second richest person in England, second only to the king. The house that he built in London is now lived in by the daughter of Queen Elizabeth. So David Ricardo was a very successful man, a very smart man. He was a member of Parliament. He became a member of Parliament. And he is one of the great early co-founders, almost, with Adam Smith, of economics. The reason the single most important reason why he's important, the only reason for our purposes, for why David Ricardo is important, is because in this book of his that I mentioned, his 1817 book, he describes what we now call the principle of comparative advantage. The principle of comparative advantage is one of the most important discoveries of the social sciences. You cannot understand society without understanding the principle of comparative advantage. You might think you can, but you really can't. David Ricardo is credited with first discovering. I say that because it's not clear, actually, whether Ricardo really knew what he stumbled upon. He kind of mentions it in passing almost. He doesn't make a big deal out of it. But it's there. And we're going to spend a good deal of time today looking at the principle of comparative advantage. So Adam Smith gave 3 reasons for why specialization causes output to increase. David Ricardo gave the 4th. Specialization according to comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is nothing like what Adam Smith identified, as you will see. It's a very different story than the one that Adam Smith told. Most of what we'll talk about, actually everything except comparative advantage, that we'll talk about in this course, I hope you will find to be just common sense. It really is. Basic economics is just seriously and consistently applied common sense. A lot of times you think, I'll draw a graph, I'll make a statement, and you think, well, it's got to be something deeper and more sophisticated than that. No, it's as simple as it sounds. The trick is, not a trick, the challenge is to use this common sense consistently and to apply it in conditions and situations in which we're not accustomed to applying. The one thing that we'll talk about in here that is not intuitive, it's quite counterintuitive, is the principle of comparative advantage. There's a famous story of one of the most famous economists ever, an American economist. You don't have to know this, you don't even have to know this guy's name, but the Nobel Prize in Economics was first given out in 1969. It was started much later than the other Nobel Prizes. The first American to get it was a man named Paul Samuelson. He got it in 1970, so this is 52 years ago. And Paul Samuelson was one of the giants of economics of any era. And he taught at a little engineering school near Boston called MIT. And one day, he's walking on the MIT campus, and there's some famous mathematician who taught at Harvard, or he was visiting MIT and Harvard, and maybe from Oxford, so some famous mathematician. And he sees Paul Samuelson. And he says, Paul, tell me one thing about economics that's both true and not trivial. Because again, most economics seems trivial. It kind of is. So this guy's trying to put economics down. He sees this famous economist. Tell me one thing about economics that's true but not trivial. And Samuelson said there's one thing. Comparative advantage. I'm going to do my best to make it as intuitive as possible and give you an explanation of it. We're going to start that in just a moment, which is why I have the doc cam on. Normally, in a proper classroom that is designed for someone who teaches, there are whiteboards, and I draw on the whiteboards as I go along. That's a proper way to teach. This classroom is not set up for teaching. I don't know what it's set up for, not teaching, but here we are. So we do the best we can. So I'll use the doc cam. And we're going to look at comparative advantage. I'm going to make many assumptions as we go through the demonstration of comparative advantage. Some of these I will drop later. But every assumption I make, every one of them is made only to make the explanation to you as easy to follow as possible. None of these assumptions, as they say, drive the conclusion. The conclusion that we're going to see, the remarkable conclusion that we're going to see from the working of comparative advantage, is not the product of any of these assumptions. I can change change any of these assumptions, and not only does the theory still work, it actually works even more strongly. So, let's get to the principle of comparative advantage. The first assumption I'm going to make is that there are only 2 people in the world. Obviously, that's unrealistic because there are close to 8 billion, only 2 people. And now I'm going to need a volunteer, because the 2 people will be, let's see, I'm going to be one of them, that's me, and I need a second person. Who wants to, what's your name?
Alex.
Say again?
Alex.
Alex?
A-L-I-M.
A-L-I-S?
F.
Alex, okay. So that means I'm going to call on you. Is that okay? Okay, so you got to pay attention. Okay? Did I get it right?
Yes.
Okay, so here's the deal. I and Aleph, am I pronouncing close enough? You can call me Dome, close enough. Right. We are stranded, you and I are stranded on a desert island. And at first, we don't know that the other person's there. You're on one side of the island and I'm on another side of the island. And for months, each of us think we are truly alone. Okay? At one point, we were going to meet, but not yet. Here's the second assumption I'm making. The only thing that Aleph and I each care to consume are fish and bananas. That's it. We don't care about leisure. We don't care about coconuts. We don't care about anything else. Just fish and bananas. I could put a third good, fourth good. It's easier just with 2. There's another assumption. The fish that I catch and the bananas that I gather, they're identical to the ones that Aleph catches and gathers. Fish and bananas are the same. What you see up here, then, is these numbers, what they show. So, now I'm going to start calling them. So what they show is the maximum amounts of each of these goods that each of us, me and him, can produce in a month if we spend all of our waking hours doing nothing but producing those goods. So if I spend all of my time gathering bananas, I can gather 50 bananas, which means how many fish will I catch? No. If I spend all of my time gathering bananas, 0, because I'm not spending any time fishing. Instead, if I would spend all of my time fishing, I can catch 50 fish, and so I would gather how many bananas? All right, good. You, on the other hand, if you spend all of your time fishing, you can catch 200 fish each month, which means you gather how many bananas? If you spend all of your time gathering bananas, you gather 100, which means you catch, in that case, no fish. Make sense? Okay. So this is called the endpoints of our production possibilities. Shows the maximum amount that I can produce of each good and that Aleph can produce of each good. By the way, it doesn't matter why Aleph can produce both more fish and more bananas than me. Maybe he's more stronger than me, smarter than me. Maybe he's just lucky it happens to be in a part of the island that's better endowed with fish and bananas. Doesn't matter. It's just the facts. So, by the way, who would you rather be, me or Aleph? Yeah. That's not a trick question. I would rather be Aleph too in this situation. But this just shows what we can produce. And remember, these are the only 2 things these are the only 2 goods, fish and bananas, that we care to produce. That just shows what we produce. It doesn't tell us what we choose to produce. So both myself and Aleph, because we still don't know of each other's existence on the island, we now have to make some decision about how we're going to spend our time. If I hated fish, if I were allergic to fish, well, then I wouldn't spend any time fishing. I'd just gather bananas. But that's not going to be the case. So each of us has to make some choice about how to spend our time. Now, I'm going to show you next what we do before we meet each other. See, I didn't know the name of the person, so I had to save that for here. So it so happens that Aleph and I each divide our work time half and half each month. So this makes sense, right? If I spend only half the time fishing, I catch half the number of fish, which is 25, half of 50. I spend the other half of my time gathering bananas, so I can gather half of the total amount that I could otherwise gather, 25. Those of you who know math, this is the assumption of linearity. If you don't understand what I said, don't worry about it. Makes sense. Aleph, remember, could, if he spent all his time fishing, catch 200 fish, but he spends only half his time fishing, so he can catch only 100 rather than 200. He spends the other half of his time gathering bananas, which means he gathers 50 rather than the total maximum amount he could gather, which is 100. So this is the amount we each choose to produce, which means, in this case, this is the amount that each of us chooses to consume. I could have chosen to spend only 10% of my time fishing and 90% of my time banana gathering. Same thing for Aleph, or some other proportions. This is what we just chose. Again, I don't have to make this particular assumption, it just makes the explanation easy to follow. In this world, here, the amount, pay attention, the amount that each of us consumes is strictly limited by the amount that each of us produces. That kind of makes sense, right? It sounds commonsensical. Oh, yeah, I can only consume what I produce. I would like to be able to consume 25 bananas and also 50 fish, but I can't. If I want 25 bananas, I have to spend time gathering 25 bananas, which means I have to take time away from fishing. And so if I take time away from fishing, I can't catch 50 fish, so I can't consume 50 fish. So each month, this is the amount of fish that I consume and produce. This is the amount of bananas that I consume and produce. This is the amount of fish that Aleph produces and consumes. It's the amount of bananas that he produces and consumes month after month after month. So one day, Aleph is out, either fishing or banana herding, and he spies me. He sees me. Oh, whoa! Shocked to discover his former economics professor standing on the same island as him. So he introduces himself to me. We're in a desert island. We can be on a first name basis. You don't have to call me professor. So he said, "Hey, Don, I'm Al. You remember me?" "Oh, yeah, I do remember you. Yeah, I'm stranded here too." Oh. So you make me after we get over the shock of meeting each other. You say, "Listen, Don, I want to make a bargain. I propose a bargain to you. Let's meet back here in 1 month. If you've looked at me, go about my business. Let's meet back here in 1 month. And if you agree," this is now you talking to me, "I, Aleph, will give you, Don, 37 fish. If you, Don, give me 25 bananas. I'm going to assume that we're both men of our words, and we're not violent. If I say no, you'll say, that's fine. You're not going to steal anything from me. I'm the same. You're not going to compel me to contract with you." So this is the proposal. Let me put it up. This is the proposal. Aleph tells me I'll give you 37 fish in exchange for 25 of my Don's bananas. 37 fish for 25 bananas. So I got to decide whether I'm going to accept this bargain or not. A naive person might say something like this, might warn me, Don, watch out. Aleph is richer than you. He can produce more fish and more bananas than you. He's taking advantage of you. Or someone might say, wow, Aleph is kind of dumb. Why would he want to trade with Don? He can produce more of both things. What can he stand to gain? But you made the offer, and I'm going to accept. And we shake on it. So 1 month from now, we're going to meet, and I'm going to bring 25 bananas and give them to you. In exchange, you're going to give me 37 fish. I want to make one other assumption. Both you and I want to continue to consume, now that we've met each other and decided to trade, the same number of bananas that we consumed before. So you remember before we met, here's the number of bananas each of us were consuming. Remember, you were consuming 50 bananas and I was consuming 25. So here's a question. Is it possible, here's an easy question. Is it possible for you, Aleph, to produce 37 fish to give to me? Easy. Yeah, that question is as easy as it sounds. Is it possible for me to produce, to give you 25 bananas and still have 25 bananas for me to eat? Yes, it is. How many bananas can I produce each month? 50. Right? That's the maximum amount I can produce. Now, that's not the amount I have been producing, but if I want to continue to consume 25 bananas, and now I want to look to give you 25, now what I have to do is stop all fishing and spend all my time banana-ing. Right? And so if I do that, I produce 50 bananas, correct? So I have 25, I can give to you at the end of the month, I have 25 left for me. Okay? So this is a deal that can be done. Especially given that both of us want to consume the same number of bananas. So we've already seen, because I just mentioned it, it's easy. I'm going to put up now the amount that each of us produces now that we've agreed to trade. I already have the answer up here. If I had a proper whiteboard in a classroom setup for someone who teaches, I wouldn't put up all these numbers just yet, but here it is. So we've already seen, because I have to give Aleph at the end of the month 25 bananas, and I want to continue to consume 25 bananas, I have to do nothing but gather bananas so that I can produce 50 bananas. Aleph, you know you're going to get 25 bananas from me, so you don't have to produce all 50 bananas for yourself. You want to continue to consume 50. You're going to get 25 from me, so you can reduce the amount of time you spend banana gathering, such that you now gather only 25 bananas rather than 50, because you get the other 25 from me. When you gather fewer bananas, what do you do with that time that you save? You shift it into fishing. As you can see, your fish output goes from 100 fish to 150 fish. This is the first part where the counterintuitive kicks in. Not really, it's math, it's arithmetic, but you got to think about it. Can anyone tell me why Aleph's output of fish goes from 100 to 150 when his output of bananas goes from 50 to 25?
There's a percentage change.
No.
I specialize more in fishing.
Well, you do. So here's what we know. Here's the easy part. We know that when you produce fewer bananas, because the only other thing you care about is fish, you're going to spend more time fishing, so you're going to produce more fish. The question is, how many more fish? How do I know it's 150? It's getting close. It's getting close. Right, but I want a specific answer. You're all kind of getting, yeah.
order this time that is spent fishing instead of
Right, but why does that raise it to 150? I think some of you see it. Let me go back to the first. I'm going to put this one back up in a moment. Let me go back to the very first matrix that I put up. Again, this is our production possibilities. This is the very same thing I showed you a few moments ago. Suppose in July, Aleph did nothing but fish. That means he would produce 200 fish and you'd gather how many bananas at Aleph? 0. You spend all your time fishing, spend no time banana gathering. So let's say in July, you do nothing but fish. So that means these 200 fish, if you had instead spent all of your time banana gathering, you would have gathered 100 bananas. So we can say, right, that those 200 fish cost you how many bananas? 100. 200 fish cost 100 bananas, which means 2 fish cost how many bananas? Right. The time it takes you to catch 1 fish, excuse me, the time it takes you to catch 2 fish is the time that if you had spent it instead gathering bananas, you would gather 1 banana. So 1 banana cost you 2 fish. Let's make it even simpler. Suppose in August you do nothing but gather bananas. You gather 100 bananas, meaning you're giving up 200 fish. How much does each of these bananas cost you? 100 bananas cost you 200 fish, right? 100 bananas cost you 200 fish. 1 banana cost you 2 fish. I may have just spoken earlier. 1 banana cost you 2 fish. 100 bananas cost you 200 fish, meaning one banana costs you 2 fish. You follow that? The time it takes you to gather a banana is time that if you instead spent it fishing, you would catch 2 fish. So now, because you know you're going to get 25 bananas from me, you produce 25 fewer bananas than before. So remember, the time it takes you to gather 1 banana is the time that you could spend producing 2 fish. So you're producing 25 fewer bananas, you're getting 2 fish for each of those 25 fewer bananas, so you're getting 50 more fish in total. So your fish output goes from 100 to 150. That make sense? Okay. Let me point out, nothing that Adam Smith identified is happening yet. I'm not becoming better at banana gathering or fishing. Aleph is not becoming better. We're not saving time. There's no machines. None of that's happening. All that's happened is we've met, we've agreed to trade. For reasons I'll explain later, but you can kind of get a hint if you think about it. I'm now specialized completely in banana gathering. Aleph is specialized, not completely, but more so in fishing. Now the day of trade arrives, 1 month later. So this is how much we produced. So Aleph, you produce 150 fish. You're going to get 25 bananas from me. That's going to leave you with how many fish for yourself? 113. 113. Here's the final outcome. Yeah, I never had these somewhere. Well, I guess I'm done. I didn't draw it in. Let me do it now. Oh, I didn't draw it in purpose because I wanted to do the suspense. So, what we produced, you produced 25 bananas, but you got 25 from me, so now you have 50 bananas to take home. You produced 150 fish, but you have to give me 37 to get those 25 bananas. That leaves you with 113 fish. I produced 50 bananas, but I have to give 25 to you, so I'm left with only 25. But I didn't give them to you as a gift, I gave them to you in exchange for 37 fish. This is the amount, these are the amounts that each of us can consume with trade. So I want you to think back to what we were consuming before we met each other. Banana-wise, neither of us is better off or worse off. Before we met each other, I was consuming 25 bananas each month. Alec was consuming 50 bananas each month. I'm still consuming 25 bananas each month. Alec is still consuming 50 bananas each month. But remember, before, when I was consuming 25 bananas, how many fish was I consuming? How many do I have now? I'm better off by 12 fish. If it's the case that me being made better off must be someone else who's made worse off, that means Alec must be made worse off. But he's not. Before, you were consuming 50 bananas and how many fish? Before. Now you're consuming 50 fish and 113 bananas. You're better off by 113 fish. 50 bananas, 113 fish. You're better off by 13 fish. I'm better off by 12 fish. If we think of this as a little country, down Albania, GDP went up by 25 fish. Where did they come from? You're not any better at fishing or bananaing than you were before. I'm not any better at fishing or bananaing than I were before. There's no one else on the island. There's no one we can exploit or steal things from. We don't have slaves. It's not manna from heaven. Every step I've shown you is something pretty logical. What happened in this case is that each of us specialized in that task for which each of us has a comparative advantage, and then we traded. I gotta say a lot more about that, but I just want to point out that both of us are better off. There's no one else around. These gains didn't come from someone. We're not exploiting a colony. We're not robbing anyone. There's no one else around. It's just Alec and I. We're both better off. Just by specializing in trading. Here's what's counterintuitive about comparative advantage. I'm going to put, again, the first matrix up. It looks like Alec is better at both things than I am, right? You're not. Not economically. Economically, what matters is not the absolute amounts that you can produce. What matters is the cost of producing each thing. Alec appears to the naked eye, to the untrained eye, to the eye that doesn't know economics, to be better, more efficient, better at producing both things than I am. He's not. He's better at producing only one thing than I am. I am better at producing something else. Alec, how many, for each banana that I produce, how many fish does it cost me? One. For each banana you produce, as we saw before, how much does it cost you? Two. I can produce a banana at half the cost that you can. Doesn't look that way immediately, but I can produce a banana. I'm a better banana-er than you are. Each fish that you catch costs you only 1/2 of a banana. Each fish that I catch costs me a whole banana. You're a much better fisherman than I am. We say, you have a comparative advantage over me at fishing. I have a comparative advantage over you at banana gathering. When two different parties have comparative advantages over each other, and they specialize each in producing that thing that they have a comparative advantage in, and then trade, they're both made better off. That's what happened in this example. What matters is not the absolute amounts. What matters is the cost. Now, I know you're wondering, how am I going to test you? That's what students wonder. I get it. I'm going to test you on this. I have a lot more to say about comparative advantages. I promise. We're going to spend a lot of time on it. I'm going to drop some of the assumptions, but I want to do some of the mechanics now just to help you perhaps better see what's going on. If these ratios differ, so for me, for Don, the ratio is 50 to 50 or 1 to 1. For Al, if the ratio is 200 to 1 or 2 to 1. If those ratios differ, here's what you know for sure. You know that one person has a comparative advantage at producing one thing, and the other person has a comparative advantage at producing the other thing. You know that with absolute mathematical certainty. The only thing then to determine is who has a comparative advantage at producing what. If you can figure out who has a comparative advantage at producing fish, then you know the other person has a comparative advantage at producing bananas. So what you do is you ask, so how much does it do what I did a moment ago? All right, let's say for this person, for Don, if he produces, how many fish does he give up for each banana that he produces? Well, 1. Okay, so it costs Don 1 fish to produce a banana. How many fish does the second person give up when he or she produces a banana? Oh, 2 fish. So the second person produces bananas at a higher cost than Don. Don has a comparative advantage at banana gathering. Then you know that the other person has a comparative advantage at fishing. To have a comparative advantage of doing something is to have a comparative advantage, a comparative disadvantage at doing at least one thing, one other thing. As we'll see, it's impossible to have a comparative advantage at doing everything. So you just look at these ratios. If the ratios differ, and they almost always will, one person has a comparative advantage of one thing, the other person has a comparative advantage of doing the other thing. And the person who has the comparative advantage is in producing one of the goods, say bananas, is the person who gives up fewer units of the other good to produce a unit of the bananas. The person who has the comparative advantage of producing fish is the person who gives up fewer bananas to produce fish. Alex gives up fewer bananas to produce a fish than I do. Compared to me, I give up fewer fish to produce a banana compared to the number of fish that Aleph gives up to produce a banana. You with me so far? Okay. I gave the 37-25 exchange ratio. It was kind of arbitrary. I could have said 38 fish and 25 bananas, or 37 fish and 24 bananas. Those would have worked. There's a range. But you can think of each of us as a seller and a buyer. When Aleph came to me and said, Don, I'll give you, in 1 month, I'll give you 37 fish if you agree to give me in exchange 25 bananas. You can think of Aleph as a banana consumer. Or you can think of him as a fish producer. As a consumer, you won't pay anyone anything if you can make it yourself at a lower cost. But you're willing to pay something, you're willing to buy it from someone else if that someone else is willing to sell it to you at a cost lower than you can get it for otherwise. For Aleph, remember, to produce a banana, he gives up 2 fish. If he can persuade me to sell him a banana for less than 2 fish, that's a gain, that's a good deal for him. 37 fish, 25 bananas. That means he's getting each banana for about 1.5 fish. Better for him to pay me 1.5 fish to get a banana than for him to pay himself 2 fish to produce each of his own bananas. Or you can think of Aleph as a producer of fish. Each fish, remember, costs him 1/2 of a banana to produce. if I'm willing to pay him more than 1/2 of a banana for one of those fish, that's a good deal. He sold to me 37 fish in exchange for 25 bananas. He basically got 2/3 of a banana for each of his fish. He can produce something at 50 cents and sell it for 67 cents, you make a profit. He can produce a banana, he can produce a fish by giving up only 1/2 of a banana and then give that fish to me and get 2/3 of a banana for it. You're better off, right? That's what you've done. For me, each fish cost me a whole banana. If Aleph is willing to sell me a fish for something less than a whole banana, I'm game. And he was. He's willing to sell me a fish for 2/3 of a banana. It cost me to produce my bananas 1 whole fish. I'm not willing to sell any of my bananas for less than that. But I got roughly 1.5 fish for each of the bananas that I produced. That's a good deal. If you produce something, if you produce a banana and it costs you only one, for me, it costs me only 1 fish, and I sell it to you and I get in exchange for each of those bananas 1.5 fish, I'm making a 50% profit. So there's a range of exchange ratios at which both of us gain. I'm not going to go into the details. I'm not going to ask you to go into the details of identifying in any numerical way those ranges. That's a little bit more elaborate economics. It's not complicated. Some of you will be able to figure it out pretty quickly. What's important for us, though, is to understand there is a range. Whenever comparative advantage exists, there is at least one price, at least one exchange ratio, fish for bananas, probably more, that if the parties agree to it and exchange at it, both parties are made better off. And that's a beautiful thing. Both parties are made better off. As I say, there are only 2 goods here, only 2 people. I'm going to introduce a 3rd good later. We can introduce a 3rd person, a 4th person, a 1,000,000th person. The story only gets stronger. The more goods you have and services you have, the more possible things to consume and produce. And the more people we have to specialize, the greater the opportunities for comparative advantage to be taken advantage of. Before I go on with it, let me just remind you, this is not an abstract, because it's very easy for theorists to draw pretty pictures and numbers and equations and stories on, in this case, a dot cam, and tell a logically coherent story. It's another thing to determine if these stories have relevance to the real world. And again, look around you and ask how much of what you consume did you produce or could you produce? And the answer is nothing. Comparative advantage is absolutely essential to that. But it's not just comparative advantage. It's not just specializing at producing what each of us has a comparative advantage in doing. We do it because we trade. Trade and comparative advantage go hand in hand. There'd be no point in me specializing in banana gathering if Aleph is not willing to trade with me. Ditto for him with fishing. What trade allows us to do is to tap into the special talents and abilities and endowments of our fellow human beings. Doesn't matter why Aleph is a better fisherman than me, as I said earlier. He just is. I wish I had his talent at fishing, but I don't. But I can tap into it with trade because I have a talent that he doesn't have. I'm a better banana gatherer. And because he wants to eat bananas and I want to eat fish, we can trade. By Aleph and I trading, I use my comparative advantage at banana gathering to entice Aleph to share with me the fruits of his better ability to fish. He uses his better ability to fish to entice me to trade with him so he can tap into my better abilities to gather bananas. Trade is a mechanism, the technology that allows us to tap into the special talents of other people, other people's comparative advantages. We each have one. Countless other people, thank goodness, have others. Trade is what allows us to take advantage of that. This is a very simple story. Two people. Now you might think, let me just point out, the only way Aleph and I would not have any inclination to trade with each other is if these ratios were the same. Like, for example, I'm not going to draw it up, but I'll have a spec. So suppose this was 200 rather than 100. Well, in that case, the cost to me of producing a banana is the same as the cost of Aleph. Same thing with fish. So in that case, there'd be no opportunities to trade. But if those ratios differ, then each of us has the opportunity to trade if we specialize according to comparative advantage. Aleph might think, because he doesn't yet have a PhD in economics, and I do, and you might think, you might think to yourself, I have a comparative advantage of fishing. I also want to get a comparative advantage in banana gathering. I'm going to try to do that too. So you want to become better at banana gathering. Let's say you succeed in doing that. You could, because you're intent on having a comparative advantage both at fishing and at banana gathering. And so you spend your nights reading books you're getting a PhD in banana gathering. You're reading books how to become a better banana gatherer. And it succeeds. You wake up one day, and let's say now, you can produce, let's say this is your ability to produce bananas skyrockets from 100 a month to 400 a month. You succeed. You now have a comparative advantage of producing bananas. Because now, over me, because now each banana for me to produce still costs one fish. Each banana for you to produce costs only half a fish. Now that you can produce 400, so you now have a comparative advantage at banana gathering. But what's happened to your comparative advantage at fishing? It's gone. I now have a comparative advantage at fishing. You, giving yourself a comparative advantage at banana gathering, have given me a comparative advantage at fishing. Even though nothing's changed in my ability to fish or gather bananas. Because now, if you spend time fishing, each fish you catch, you give up 2 bananas. Each fish I catch, I give up only 1 banana. We'll look at this in a slightly different way. I'm going to keep you, Aleph, with having a comparative advantage at fishing. Now I want to combine Adam Smith with David Ricardo a little bit. I'm going to do it this way. So remember, Adam Smith said one of the things he said is that when you concentrate more time on a particular task, you become better at it. And that makes sense. You know that. I'm not very good at that. Nothing's going to happen to me. My abilities are going to remain the same, even though I'm specialized completely in banana gathering. But when Aleph, because he spends more time fishing, you become better at fishing. And so over time,
It's fine.
So he has the same when he hit the before, he was just sitting on he said he was producing before. That's 50 bananas. This trade, he produced but he's still consuming the same number of bananas. I think and you can say greater but no one can learn everything. No, pretty much. I try to believe that. No one. Yeah, send it to me and I'll oh, you're the I looked through the drum. So yeah, well. Last time I checked, it was not. So they were already 75 students. It won't allow it. But the last I looked, we were under. Not much under. So if that's the case, I know. You're welcome. So basically, yes, it's I Okay. All right. I want to clarify one thing from before. When I mentioned that, when I gave you that short example, that suppose Aleph can produce 200 fish and 200 bananas, and I produce 50 fish and 50 bananas. That's the one. In that case, the ratios are the same. In that case, no one has a comparative advantage or disadvantage. But whenever the ratios differ, one person has a comparative advantage at one thing, the other person has a comparative advantage at the other thing. Or you can say, one person has a comparative disadvantage at producing one thing, and the other person has a comparative disadvantage at producing the other thing. But if the ratios are the same, then in that case, that's the only case where there's no comparative advantage. Now we live in a world, as I said, this is very simplifying assumptions. We live in a world in which there are many, many people, there are many, many goods. I don't want you to get lost in the math here. This is a principle, it's just arithmetic. That's all it is, it's arithmetic. But the lesson is an economics one. The economic lesson is what matters is how much it costs each person to produce something for himself or herself compared to how much it costs that person to trade with someone else to acquire that thing. And each of us goes through life saying, okay, I want to acquire the things I want to acquire at the lowest possible cost. Some things we make for ourselves. You probably, often make your own sandwiches at lunch. It doesn't pay you to bring someone in. Sometimes it does. You go to a restaurant. Probably pays you to put your own socks on. I doubt any of you hire someone. Anybody hire someone to come put your socks on? Really? We all have the comparative advantage of putting on our own socks. The cost is so small to each of us. It doesn't pay. There is an amount you can pay me to be your sock putter on. It would be a lot of money. It would be worth your while. But if you were to pay me, hey, God, work for me for $1 million. Put my socks on every day. Sign me up. Kind of a disgusting job. It's a lot of money. And so, this is comparative advantage is just arithmetic. Just these numbers and the ratios. But they tell an economic story. I will send to you, either this evening when I get home or tomorrow morning, I will send you a reading on comparative advantage that has exactly these same numbers. It's a reading written by me. The two people are Bob and Ann, but it's fish and bananas, and the same number, 200, 100, 50, 50. So you'll be able to, the reading will make it more clear. I'll also send you some videos on comparative advantage. I'll send you several short readings, one of which will have these numbers, and a video or two on comparative advantage so it can be driven home. It is not an intuitive concept, but it is an incredibly important concept. Specialization is driven largely by comparative advantage. The outcomes that Adam Smith identified when specialization occurs are also real. We do save time moving from task to task. We do become more skilled in doing what we do. It usually reinforces comparative advantage. There is machines and mechanization. That's very important. But comparative advantage as it works in the world is foundational. You cannot understand trade patterns, either personally or internationally. We talk about trading among countries, unless we understand comparative advantage. Now I want to introduce a third good. Because, again, I was serious, not that literally. We had only two goods before, fish and bananas. Which means that when Aleph is fishing, you're fishing by hand. There's no fishing poles, no fishing net, no fishing boat. There's just fish and bananas. You can't fish with a banana. Or with a fish. Because you eat the fish. One day you're fishing. And you get this bright idea. You're an entrepreneur. That's what entrepreneurship is, part. You're alert to a good idea. Wow, it's a creative idea. You're thinking, wow, I'm catching fish by hand. If I had a tool, I may be able to catch more fish. But what's a good tool for catching fish? A toothpick won't work, probably. A net. So wow, if only I had a net. And then let's say, just for a moment, you have a pipeline to God. And you say, God! God always speaks with a deep, heavy voice. Yes? If I had a net, would I catch more fish? Yes. How many more fish would I catch, God? Suppose he said, well, right now you're catching 200 a month. If you had a net, you'd be able to catch 200.000001 fish a month. You'd go, you'd be disappointed. Then you really wouldn't want a net, right? Who cares? But suppose that's, it's not like me, but I made a mistake. I meant you'd be able to catch 2,000 fish a month. Whoa! You want that net now. You say, this is great, God. Yes. So God, can you make me the net? No. But you're God. Yeah, but I'm not making you the net. Bye. So if you get a net, you'll be able to multiply by 10 your ability to catch fish. Rather than catching them by hand, you have this tool. In the same amount of time it is now taking you to catch 200 fish, in that time, you can catch 2,000 fish. Or differently, you can catch 200 fish in 1/10 of the time. It's pretty amazing. You want the net. You ask God to make it for you, He's not doing it. You got a problem. Who's going to make the net? Let's start by assuming that you have a comparative advantage also in making the net. You somehow know that God gave us one more thing, Al. If you decide to make a net, it's only you and Don on that island, you have a comparative advantage in making the net. Not him. Thank you, God. You're welcome. You sure you want to make a net? No. Stop asking. So you know you have a comparative advantage in making the net. But that doesn't solve your problem. Because this is a really poor society. Each month, you have only 113 fish to eat and 50 bananas. Right? You barely live, man. Right? And so if you spend God comes back and says, I'll give you one more question. You say, you guys just think carefully. And you say, well, how long will it take me to make the net? 1 month. Okay. No, I'm really going. It's going to take you 1 month to make the net. If you spend the whole month making the net, you'll be dead at the end of the month because you'll die of starvation. Because you won't have 113 fish, you won't have 50 bananas. Is all lost? What can be done? Remember, God's not going to make you the net. You have a comparative advantage in making the net, so it'd be even worse if I tried to make the net. I'd starve too. How can we make the net? Anyone have any idea?
Fish in the next month.
You're kind of getting at it, but yeah.
Can I train amazing that one?
And forget about the numbers now.
Can I train what I have, let's say, more value to you, so more items for this month?
Here's what I'm getting at. What's that?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, feed me for this month so I can like feed you more later. Like after I'm done, and then I'll feed you.
Well, so you're going to impose a cost on me? Don, consume less so I can consume more. No, thank you.
What about if I take a lot longer than a month, but still I can take my time to fish and grab my bananas?
I think so. Some of you are getting kind of close. Here's what I'm getting. I'll take one more. Yeah.
What if transfer days and like when they're working on the net, and then at the end?
No, but he has a comparative advantage of making the net. Yeah.
They go.
You're going to kick yourself when you have simple answers. Yeah, but the problem is the net has to be built now, right? And we got to eat now. I have to eat, you have to eat now. And there's not a whole lot to eat. It's going to take a whole month to build the net. If you spend the whole month building the net, you'll starve to death. And that's not going to do you any good. Here's what you do. Save. It's a simple answer. If you want to build the net, I'm going to need time to build the net. It's not pleasant, but it can be done. So rather than every month consume all of your 113 fish and all of your 50 bananas, grab me one other assumption. These fish and bananas keep. Right? You consume only, say, 100 fish, and you consume only 45 bananas. You take 13 fish and put aside 5 bananas and put aside. You're building up a little store of fish and bananas. So that one day you have enough fish and bananas on hand, so you can spend the whole month building the net while eating what you save. That makes sense? So you can't build it now, but eventually you'll be able to build it if you save. So that's one way the net might get built. You save, and then when you build the net, you basically transform your current consumption. You've reduced your current consumption by saving, and you've transformed it into a tool that will increase your future consumption. That makes sense? Increasing your future consumption is a good thing with this tool, but the most important lesson at this point is it's not free. If a tool is going to be built, someone's got to save to build it. In this example, I have you saving to build it. Let me give you a different example. You still have a comparative advantage at building the net, but you also know that you don't have a whole lot of self-control. You can't really save. You have 113 fish to eat, you're going to eat 113 fish. 50 anyway, eat 50 bananas. It's all lost. Not quite, because there's someone else on the island, me. Maybe I can save. So you come to me and you say, Don, I had this idea for building a net, but I need some resources to do it, and I'd like to borrow them from you. And if I agree to that, that means I have to have resources to lend to you, which means I have to save. So maybe I reduce my consumption. Rather than eat all 37 of my fish, each month I eat only 30. Rather than eat all 25 of my bananas, eat only 20. Put them aside. At some point I have enough saved up, and I give them to you. Now, I don't give them, I could give them to you. I'm not a mean person, but remember, I'm self-interested. I'm going to want something back. And, so let's say I give to you, lend to you, 113 fish and 50 bananas, because that's how many you need to sustain you for a month. So I'm going to want at least back 113 fish and 50 bananas. That's how much I lent to you. But I'm probably going to want more back than that. So I might ask for 100 and, stick with the same banana. Okay, or maybe I'll ask for all in fish. Pay me back in 400 fish or something like that. It's going to be a value more than I've lent to you. Because, and you'll be willing to do that, by the way, because by borrowing the money and building this tool, you're going to be a lot more productive, so it'll be worth your while to do it. You might think I'm a bad person for asking for this additional payment. Well, what do we call that additional payment, by the way?
Interest.
Interest, that's right. You might think me a bad person, but I'm not really a bad person. First of all, for me to save, it imposes a cost on me. You could do the saving, but you don't want to. But you're asking me to bear that cost. You're asking me to defer consumption. Well, it's costly. Why should I do it for free? In addition, there's always a chance that I won't get repaid. Maybe you'll die. Right? Maybe we're an island, a tropical mosquito may come by and infect you with some horrible disease and you croak. Right? Am I going to repay? Or maybe you get rescued and you don't tell me. Well, a bunch of things could happen. I have to be, in order for me to entrust you with resources that I could keep myself and consume, I'm turning it over to you. I have to be compensated for the risk of not being repaid. And I'm compensated for that risk by you agreeing to give me a whole lot more. Well, if you promise to pay me 450 fish, okay, now it's worthwhile. And I also have to be compensated to entice me to do what you don't want to do, namely forego current consumption by saving. So one other possibility is you build the net, and I do the savings. You spend that month building the net, nothing happens to you, no mosquito bites you. And now you have this net, you can produce 2,000 fish a month, you're super wealthy, you're able now to repay me what I've asked, we're both richer. Your comparative advantage of fishing is going way up, my comparative advantage of banana gathering, even if nothing has happened to my 50-50, has also gone way up. Compared to your cost of producing bananas. Or, I'm not going to go through all the possible ways of doing it. It could be that I have a comparative advantage at building the net. But I'm not a fisherman, I don't have a comparative advantage at using it. So you might hire me to build the net. Or I may go into the net building business. Oh, I think that Alice might need a net. I think I might set up shop as a net entrepreneur, build a net and sell it to her. Or as I said, you could hire me. I'll pay you a certain fixed wage for you to work for a month for me to build the net. The point, no matter which of these ways are used, whether I build the net, you build the net, whether I save and you save, the point here is someone has to save. If each of us insists every month on eating all of the fish we have and all of the bananas we have, the net will never get built. For tools to get built, current consumption has to fall to lower than it would otherwise be in order to have resources available to produce those tools. Economists make a distinction between two kinds of goods. You can write this down. One kind of good is a consumption good. Consumption good. Whenever you hear me say the word good, you can also hear me saying good and or services, but I'm not always going to say that. A consumption good. A consumption good is, as its name implies, it's a good It's not a tool meant for anything. It's just something we want to consume. An ice cream cone, a trip to Tahiti, going to the movies on Saturday night. For me, a glass of wine or a bottle. Consumption goods are the ultimate reason we engage in economic activity. And these can be shallow material things like gold-plated jacuzzis. These could be uplifting, high things like going to the opera. Doesn't matter. The ultimate things we work for. Capital goods are tools. Capital goods have value not because we want to consume them, but because they are useful in helping us to produce other goods and services. The net is valuable to Alec, not because he wants to consume the net. If God was right the first time, and having the net would barely cause his fish production to rise, he wouldn't bother to build the net. The net is of value only because it's a useful tool in helping him increase his production. I don't know what the ratios are, but our world is filled with capital goods. Karl Marx called it capitalism for good reason. This classroom, as inferior as it is a tool. No one built this, no one lives here. No one built this as a final consumption good. This is a tool for enhancing construction. It's not a very good tool, but it's a tool. That's what it's meant for. You can tell how much I love this classroom. Mm-hmm. All this stuff up here, these are tools. Jeff Bezos and Fred Smith own lots of airplanes that shuttle packages around for overnight delivery across the world. They don't own those airplanes as private consumption goods. I'm sure each of these billionaires does have a private jet, but the vast majority of the airplanes that Jeff Bezos owns isn't a consumption good. It's a tool that he uses to make Amazon.com more productive. Everything, tools can be really, really minor. Pieces of paper, pencils, to really elaborate, like cargo ships, high-tech equipment in hospital operating rooms, research labs. And if these tools do their job, they increase the output of the people who use the tools. That's why we build them. That's why we build the tool that pulls the wire from the spool, and the other tool that cuts the wire, and the other tool that sharpens one end of the wire into a point. Our world is filled with these amazing tools. The point that I want to drive home now is that every one of these tools represents savings. All the resources that have gone, the resources that are in this classroom, the resources that are in bulldozers, the resources that are in cargo jets and cargo ships, all the resources that are in research labs, all the resources that are in 18-wheeler trucks, handheld hammers, all of those things could instead have been used to produce goods for final consumption. But they weren't. Some people were willing to defer their consumption and allow their resources to be transformed into tools in the hope of being able to increase consumption in the future. If we could do it, it's a free country, if we all, everybody in the world, decided, we're going to, let's say we all thought we were going to die within the next couple of hours, so we just consume maximum. No point in saving if they're going to kick off soon. Just consume as much as possible. If all of humanity did that, there'd be nothing left for building tools, nothing left for building capital goods. So the ultimate goal is consumption goods. And we get more of them, the more and better tools that we have. But to get more and better tools, we have to be willing, at least some of us do, to reduce the amount of consumption we engage in today in order to be able to build more tools so that in the future we have more consumption goods to produce and consume. That make sense?
Yeah.
No matter who does the savings, no matter who builds the tools, savings has to be done. So if you look at a society that has a lot of capital equipment in it, that's a society that, for whatever reason, has a relative lot of savings. You look at a society that doesn't, that's a society that, for whatever reason, doesn't have a lot of savings. Or at least not a lot of savings that's transformed into tools. I guess you can save and hoard and do nothing with it. I want to talk a little bit about money. If you take Econ104, which is Principles of Macroeconomics, or even better, Econ 310, I think it is here at GMU, Money and Banking, you'll get to learn a lot more about money. Microeconomics isn't a lot about money, but I want to say a few words about money because most of the time in this class, we're going to talk about prices as expressed in money. We've actually seen prices so far today, but not in terms of money. What Aleph and I have done when we exchange, we engage in what's called barter, B-A-R-T-E-R. Barter is exchange not involving money. It's a direct exchange of good for good, or good for service, or service for service. Very little of exchange that takes place in modern society is done by barter. Some of it's done. You may agree to wash my car if I agree to tutor you for an hour in economics. Now, that would be barter. There's no money involved. But very little of that is done. The vast majority of what we buy with money, and the vast majority of what we sell for money. In a two-person world like this, a very simple world, there's no need for money. But when we expand the number of people, money quickly becomes necessary if there's going to be any kind of complex trading at all. And you'll see why in just a moment. Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt, but I have one question. So, imagine if a country has way too much savings.
Has way too much what?
Savings, money, and resources. Does that also go hand in hand with innovation? Like, if a country has way too much money, does that mean the country is also very innovative technologically?
No. So let me just explain what money is. So, remember, money is not wealth. I said that last week. Money is not wealth. But I haven't said what it is. If you have all of Jeff Bezos' money and you're stranded on a desert island, you're not rich. You're pretty poor. But the way we talk, because we use money so much, because the vast majority of things that we buy and want to buy, we use money to buy them. We don't use barter. We've gotten into this habit of saying, oh, he's rich because he's got a lot of money. And that's a little bit misleading. And it's so too for a country. So bear with me when I explain what money is. Money has three functions. first two are by far the most important. The third one is kind of necessary, but it's not as fundamental as the first two. The most obvious function of money is that it is a medium of exchange. A medium of exchange. It comes between exchanges. All I do, as I said, quite truthful, all I do in my productive life is teach economics and write about economics. That's all I do. I don't mow lawns, I don't provide medical service, I don't do anything except economics. George Mason pays me in money. If I give a talk, I get paid in money. If I write an article, I get paid in money. Because those people, for whatever reason, want to hear or read what I have to say about economics, and they won't give me money for it. But it's not the money I want. It's not the monochrome portrait of dead American statesmen that prompt me to be here at 9:20 at night when I could be home drinking. I'm willing to do this because I'm getting money, because I can take that money and buy the things I want. Like wine, and like clothes, like wine, and like shoes, and like wine, and like soft cell phone service. I do like wine very much.
What about beer? Vodka?
It's not, I won't talk about alcohol now.
Champagne.
Don't get carried away. I don't work for the money.
Grab some
I work
tequila.
for what the money can buy. But I'm willing to let the money come in between the exchange. Okay, I'll lecture, I'll get paid the money. The first step, lecturing. I'm providing a real service. But I'm getting paid in money, not the thing I ultimately want. But I accept it because I know I can go out and the wine merchant will accept the money for the wine I want to buy. My physician will accept the money for the services that I'm buying from him or her. AT&T will accept the money in exchange for the monthly cell phone service that I purchase or get. On and on and on. The money comes between me and the provision of what I produce and the consumption of what I consume. Same for you. Imagine a world without money. Somebody says, I got rid of money. By the way, a handful of societies have tried this. This is an utter calamity.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders wanted everything.
Bernie
Sanders, when he ran his campaign in 2016, he wanted everything.
Yeah, well, one of the things economics teaches is, you shouldn't need economics to be taught this, but reality is not optional. Reality is just bigger. I would like to be able to flap my arms and fly. I really would, and it would be fun, but I can't do it. In fact, if I try to do it and I jump off of a high enough building, I'll be dead. So I just have to accept that reality. And part of being a mature person is accepting reality. Anyway, imagine a world without money. Let's say we suddenly have rid of money right now, and I want wine. What would I have to do? It's possible. It's possible. I go to Total Wine, which is where I buy my wine, and I say, Mr. Total Wine, I'd like a case of that wine there. And Mr. Total Wine says, I'm not giving it to you. I said, oh, I know. He said, what do you got to offer? I said, well, I can give you an economics lecture. It's possible. He'll go, whoa, this is my lucky day. I was hoping someone would come in and offer me an economics lecture. Give me an economics lecture, I'll give you the wine. Possible, it's possible. That would be barter. But now I'm feeling sick. I need medical care. How likely is it that my physician will also want an economics lecture? Not very. I need to eat. How likely is it that giant food store will want an economics lecture? Not very. If we didn't have money, none of us could afford to specialize. And remember, we've already seen specialization is the key to increasing total output. If we didn't have money, none of us could specialize. I couldn't afford to be an economics lecturer. But the chances of me encountering people who have what I want and want what I have would be really too small. I'd have to produce most of myself, or be a huge generalist. Produce lots of basic things, increasing my chances that someone who has what I want will want one of the general things that I have. We couldn't specialize in a world without money. What money does is enable a separation of the desires of the producer from the desires of the consumer. And that's a good thing. Fortunately, there are enough people in the world who want to hear or read what I have to say about economics. They gather here, most of them gather here at George Mason, others of them gather elsewhere when I give a talk or write articles, and they pay me in money. I have no idea how they earn that money, and I don't care how they earn that money. I don't have to care. Because I know if they pay me in money, I can then spend that money buying what I want. And the people that I spend the money buying what I want don't care where I got it from. You want, or your parents want, or the taxpayer of the state of Virginia wants, for me to teach you economics. That's why you're here. And there's enough of you in that condition that I'm getting paid generously to do what I'm doing. That enables me to earn enough money to go to the Total Wine and offer enough money for a case of wine. I don't have to worry whether or not the Total Wine guy wants economics or not. You want economics. That's all I need to know. You pay me. The Total Wine guy, I don't have to care what he wants. I'm just giving him money. Money means that when you want something, I'm just repeating myself now, when you want something, you don't have to worry about whether or not the person that has what you want also wants what you have, except the money. You don't have to want your particular specialist output, like my economics lectures. So we live in a world of money. We express prices and incomes and net worth in terms of money. But always keep in mind that behind that is what the money can buy. But money does play, nevertheless, an important role. It is a medium of exchange, as I have just explained. It's also, the second role of money, it's also a unit of account. It's a unit of account. What this means is, money is kind of like an objective measuring unit. Let me go off on a tangent for just a second. We all differ in lots of different ways. Some of us are Americans, some of us are not. Some of us are male, some of us are female. Some of us are tall, some of us are short, some of us are older, some of us are younger. I'm a lot older, as you can tell. Some of us like chocolate ice cream, others of us don't. We differ in all kinds of different ways. That's trite to say. It's important because of comparative advantage. It's important. That's why we're all the same. We have comparative advantage. But there are some. But for some purposes, we can measure ourselves against each other in objective units. For example, height. We have this thing called the imperial measuring units. We can also use the metric system. But in the US, we use the imperial, inches, feet, yards. So all of us, no matter how much we differ, we can all be compared to each other, our heights can all be compared to each other in terms of inches. Just objective. I'm 6 feet tall, you're 5 feet 9, you're 6 feet 3. Pretty objective. It allows the comparison. Money is a unit of account. It serves very much a similar role. It allows the comparison, the economic comparison, of things that are otherwise incredibly diverse. Again, because I like to talk about myself, all I do is what I'm doing now. Or writing kind of stuff I do now. That's all I do. Teach economics. How do you compare that to the value of someone who produced an automobile, the value of the automobile, the value of the wine? In a lot of ways, they're not comparable. But they are comparable in terms of money. Money gives us an economic objective measuring rod against which we can compare the market values of different things. It's not to say, contrary to what a lot of people, mistake economists, are saying, it's not to say that market values are the only thing that matters. Of course not. Only a moron believes that. But it is to say that when we have market values expressed in money, we can compare them. Just like when we have heights expressed in inches, we can compare them. It doesn't mean that the only thing about you that matters is your height measured in inches, and the only thing that matters about me is my height measured. Of course not. But it is a fact I'm 6 feet tall. It's a fact that you're 6 feet 3. And it's a fact that you're 3 inches taller than me. So we can compare the economic value things, the market value of things, in terms of money. Let's say I have an automobile that I can sell for $20,000. I can't sell it for more than that, but I can sell it for $20,000. What's the market value of that automobile? Well, how does that automobile compare to your labor? It's kind of a vulgar comparison. Hey, labor is special and sacred and inheres in the person. I get all that, and I don't dispute it. But you need an automobile. I have an automobile. It's good for you to know how long you have to work in order to earn enough money to buy my automobile. Let's say that you can earn I'm going to make this simple. I don't want to get bogged down in arithmetic. Let's say you're really talented and you can earn $10,000 an hour. That means you have to only work 2 hours to buy my automobile. Each one of your labor hours is worth half of my car. My car is worth 2 of your labor hours. Economically, money, because it's a unit account, allows the comparison, the value comparison of things that are otherwise incomparable. A car and your labor. But you know this. You would be taken for granted. Someone says, you want to buy something, you ask the price. Why do you ask the price? That tells you how much you have to give up. And if someone says, well, the car costs $20,000, you look at it, you think, okay, how much is it worth to me? We all kind of understand what $20,000 means in 2022 America. So we all kind of have some sense of what we could buy, what other things we could buy with $20,000. So if we spend $20,000 in the car, we give up these other things. And how much of these other things? Without money, making that calculation would be almost impossible. You have to know how much the car, how many pecans I would accept in exchange for the car. How many bottles of wine I'd accept in exchange for the car. How many wristwatches I'd accept for exchange for the car. How many back rubs I'd accept for exchange for the car. All sorts of things. You couldn't do that. Money makes all that unnecessary. Costs $20,000, you can earn $10,000 an hour, you have to work 2 hours to buy my car. If you make only $1,000 an hour, you have to work 20 hours. Make only $100 an hour, you have to work 200 hours. $10, 2,000 hours. You get it. So money is a unit of account that allows the comparison of values of very, very otherwise completely different things, and that's very useful. The third and less compelling function of money, although it needs it, we said money is a store of value. It's a store of value. Because you accept money, you accept it because you know eventually you're going to spend it. That works only if you anticipate that the money is going to keep its value. Ice cream would make a really bad money. It might be really valuable to you now, but if I paid you an ice cream, an hour from now it's not going to be worth it, it's going to melt. So for something to function as a money, it has to be able to keep its value pretty well. At least long enough to make exchanges possible. So money is a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. So where does it come from? Most people think, because it's the world we live in today, most people think money was invented by government. Wasn't. Governments have since taken over the issuance of lots of money, but money wasn't invented by government. Money just emerged. This is an important lesson. Lots of things just emerge. There's a lot of useful, orderly things in our lives. And we take for granted that no one invented. They're very orderly, and yet no one planned them. The most obvious example is language. We're all speaking language. Well, I'm speaking language. And you understand me. It's not perfect, of course. There's always, sometimes you can't hear me, sometimes you don't. I may use an unfamiliar word, I try not to. Sometimes my wording isn't clear. But basically you understand what I'm saying. No one would deny the usefulness to humans of language. Yet no one invented it. There wasn't a time deep in the past where we were all mute and some brilliant person got the idea, hey, what if we all talk? Hey, folks! What's that song? What's that noise? No one invented language. Early pre-humans were able to make sounds with things that eventually evolved into vocal cords. And sounds came to be understood in different language communities to indicate certain objects or certain emotions or certain actions. There was no person who invented the word chair. No one said, in English, let the sound chair mean that thing that people sit in. Brilliant, we agree upon that. Well, now what would we call the thing where you sit in front of and put food on? Table. Yes, okay, table. No one invented that. Language just emerged over time. And it changes over time, evolves over time, it will continue to evolve over time. We have a very difficult time communicating easily if we went back to Shakespearean England. We get a lot of it. We wouldn't understand as much as we do English now. Same thing if we were to be transported 200 years or 300 years in the future to still U.S. speaking English, language would be different. But no one invented it. And yet it's clearly orderly. It's very complex. You know how complex rules of grammar and vocabulary and syntax are. And yet 4-year-olds get it. So just because something is useful doesn't mean it had to be designed. In fact, before I get back to money, I want to point out that even law, most law, is not designed. Some law is. The proper name for that law is legislation. That law is designed by monarchs or dictators, or better yet, democratically elected legislatures. So some laws design legislation. Most laws not designed at all. There was a time in human history when someone said, let's not kill each other. Okay, let's stop that. Murder is not illegal in Virginia because we have written in the Virginia Criminal Code, murder is unlawful. If for some odd reason that statute got annulled, you think it'd be fine to murder people? No. It would still regard as horribly wrong. People who committed murder would be punished. Right and wrong behavior is learned through social interaction. Those behaviors that are really, really disruptive of social interaction we call criminal. Murder, rape, arson, theft. Don't do that. They're unlawful not because the government said they're unlawful. They're unlawful because we humans can't survive in society if we tolerate it. And governments recognize, as they should, recognize the fact that those things are not social, and we call them unlawful. But they're not unlawful because the government declared them to be unlawful. They wouldn't become lawful if the government, some wacko took over the government and said, from here on in, it's perfectly legal to steal from each other. We wouldn't do it. We don't realize how many of the rules that we follow in society are ones that are not designed by anyone, but we don't realize how many of these rules we follow. You ever go into the Johnson Center when it's crowded and you want to sit down to eat lunch and you have difficulty finding a table space? Ever happened to you? So suppose you're walking to the JC and it's at lunch and it's really crowded and you'd like to sit down to eat. And you see a chair where no one's sitting. Has this ever happened to you? And you're happy. So you go over to that chair and you get there, but when you get there, you see that there are books on the table. What does that tell you? Someone's there. And so, do you sit there? No. Exactly. Who designed that? Suppose you go into the Johnson Center, you see a chair, and there are no books in front of it. And you want to get lunch. What you do, you've probably done this. I bet most of you have done this at least once. You put your books down, right? And that reserves the place. You know it does. You're not even thinking about it. You go wait in line, you get your food. Let's say you come back, and I'm sitting there. I'm going to be a bad guy. I'm sitting there, in that chair, and there are your books in front. And you say, you say, what the? You're not an adult yet, so you don't curse. What the heck are you doing? Sitting in my chair. And I said, what do you mean your chair? You weren't sitting here. And you said, well, no, but I mean, you pointed the books. And I say, I happen, and this is true, I happen to know, I went to law school. You can look at the George Mason Student Handbook. You can look at the statutes of the state of Virginia. You can look at the Constitution of the state of Virginia, the Constitution of the United States, the UN Declaration of Rights. Nowhere in there does it say that putting books on a table reserves a chair for someone. Ha! I didn't break the law. How would you feel? You'd think I'm nuts. And I wouldn't be nuts. I would be literally correct. You can look in all those things and anywhere else you like. You will not find it written down anywhere that putting books on a table reserves the chair by those books. It's just an evolved rule that helps us get along. We all expect each other to follow. Sometimes it gets broken. All laws get broken. People get murdered. The fact that people get murdered doesn't mean there's not a law against murder. Let me ask you a question. How many of you in here, give me an honest answer, I promise not to tell, have ever knowingly, intentionally driven faster than the posted speed limit? I have to. On a daily basis. You know, lawyers have a term called black letter law. That term means this law is about as clear as it can be. There's no ambiguity. It's black letter. There is no more black letter law than posted speed limits. It's literally in black letters. 55 mph. So you're driving down the highway one day. Your car's in good shape. Weather's fine. Traffic's normal, and you're driving at 58 miles an hour. And you look in the rearview mirror. Then you pull over, and the cop says, "Sir/ma'am, do you know how fast you were going?" And you're honest. You see, I was going 58. That's right. 58. What part of 55 mph don't you understand? I'm giving you a ticket. Give you a ticket. How do you feel? You literally broke the law. Do you feel like justice has been done to you?
No.
No, of course not. Suppose instead, same conditions, you're driving on the highway, and you're not driving 58, you're driving 98. And you get pulled over. I suspect, as before, you're unhappy to get pulled over. But in the second case, you don't really feel like an injustice has been done. Driving 98 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone really is too fast, and you know it's too fast. In the first case, I would argue, the law really isn't 55 miles an hour. The law is, the posted speed limit under normal conditions, plus a few extra miles per hour. And if a police officer pulls you over and tickets you for going 58 in a 55 mile an hour zone, I submit that it's the police officer who violates the law, not you. It's an evolved rule of behavior. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's the way it is. That's what you expect. You don't expect to get pulled over going 58 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone. And if you hear of a friend or loved one who gets pulled over going 58 or 59 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone and gets ticketed, you feel bad for that person. So, well, that's unfortunate. If that person was going 100 miles an hour, you say, well, it's unfortunate, but really you had to respect that, of course. So just because something is written down doesn't mean it's law. And just because something is not written down doesn't mean it's not law. That's a very simple law, that books reserve space on the table. But it's a law. Most of the rules we live by were never designed by anyone, not by government, not by anyone. They just evolved. And we live by them. Governments make legislation that, if they enforce it, it changes the way we behave. It can serve a good purpose. Money is very much like law and language. No one designed it. It evolved into existence. At some point in the very distant past, we don't know when, there were different kinds of monies that evolved over time. But one thing they all have in common is that at some point, that which became money is something that everyone came to expect would be widely accepted. So in a society without money, I have something to sell. I have my pig to sell. And the only person who wants to buy the pig is the tailor. Well, I don't need a new set of clothes, but the tailor happens to have, I'll just now call it a widget, some object And I might be willing to sell my pig to the tailor for the widget, not because I want the widget, but I'd be willing to do that if I were pretty sure that the person that has what I do want to buy also wants a widget. And so I say, okay, tailor, I'll sell you my pig, I'll take your widget. I don't want your widget, I don't plan to use the widget. I don't like widgets. But the vintner, the guy who makes the wine, wants the widget. So when people came to observe that certain goods were much more widely acceptable than other goods, some of those goods evolved into money. At some point, some goods became so widely accepted, people just started thinking of them as money. I'm going to accept that bar of gold, not because I have any interest in gold, but because I know that whoever has what I want to buy will accept that bar of gold in exchange. Money evolved, just like the word chair, just like the most of the rules that we live by, norms and laws. The kind of things that became money, that evolved into money, I mentioned gold, tend to be things like gold, precious metals. If you take Econ104 or money and banking, you'll go into a lot more detail about the nature of money, the nature of banking. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that beginning of next week's class, but let me just give you 5 more minutes. The kind of things that become money, I'm not going to go into all the detail if you get these other classes. They have a few things in common. Number one, they're a pretty good store of value. Gold is a pretty good store of value. It doesn't disintegrate overnight. Gold doesn't even tarnish, which makes it really good as a money. It continues to look the same. Another good property of money is something that if you chop it up, it doesn't lose value. So if I have a whole bar of gold and I chop it in half, each half is still worth half of what the whole bar was worth. A dog would make a pretty bad piece of money. Because if you chop the dog in half, then each half is not worth. I needed a vivid example. But you can divide gold. You can divide silver, and it retains the portion of its value. Also, it has to be something that's relatively easy to carry. That's the purpose of money, right? You carry it. No, we're talking about coins and currency. You carry it around. A skyscraper would be a terrible piece of money. Oh. A big boulder, terrible piece of money. Gold, you can carry it. So there are certain physical properties of the things that we know over the years have evolved into money. And those are just some of them. But what about banking? I'm going to spend the beginning of the first half of next week's class talking about banking and talking about the role that banking plays in encouraging us to save and to get those savings from the people who do the savings, like me, to the people who need the savings to produce capital goods, like Alec, when he's going to produce his net. I'll see you all next week.
Leave it.